We're here today with Kelly Patterson, who is principal consultant and also psychologist with Mapien. Kelly, thanks for joining us. What are we going to jump into today?
Beautiful. Today we're going to be talking all things psychosocial hazards. So we're going to have a look at what they are, the new regulations that come into play as of the 1st of December, what the kind of expectations regarding those regulations are from WorkSafe as well, and what small to medium businesses can do in this space to make sure that they protect their workers from any kind of psychological harm.
All right, let's jump into it. So, Kelly, just to start us off, what exactly is a psychosocial hazard? And in putting it into some plain business language, could you explain for our business community, please?
No worries. So, a psychosocial hazard is anything in how work is organized or carried out that can cause psychological harm or negatively impact somebody's mental health or their well-being. So, it's not about personalities, and it's not about people not being tough enough. It's about work conditions that create pressure and stress or even de-stress as well. And some of the most common psychosocial hazards in small to medium businesses include things like high job demands, like, they're getting to that time of year, super busy in the lead up to the end of the year. Aggressive or abusive customers can be a psychosocial hazard. A lack of clarity around who's doing what, maybe not enough support or supervision, and something like, rapid business change without kind of a lot of communication. They're all kind of examples of psychosocial hazards.
And so psychosocial hazards are getting a change in regulations which are about to come in. What do those hazards have to do for business owners, and how do those new regulations fit in with different businesses, particularly SMEs?
Psychosocial hazards matter because they affect both people and performance as a business. So when they're not managed well, we see things like burnout, high turnover, maybe conflict within the team, absenteeism, and things like customer complaints increase as well. So when they're managed well, we see the opposite happen. So really, there's a strong business case for getting it right. And as far as the regulations go, really employers have always had the duty to protect workers' psychological health.
Mm.
But these new regulations that are coming into effect on the 1st of December, they really make this duty more explicit. So they're really spelling out exactly what WorkSafe expects employers to do to prevent that harm. These regulations apply to all employers, regardless of the business size. And really, we've had a lot of requests lately for assistance with, building new systems to manage psychosocial risk, but you don't really need a new safety system. It's really about including psychosocial risks in the one that you already have.
So if hazards are essentially the problem, what does a control mean? Because I know you mentioned this previously. So what does a good control look like? And if you can just explain perhaps what a control is for businesses.
Of course, of course. So a control is really simply an action a business takes to remove or to reduce exposure to a psychosocial hazard. So WorkSafe is very clear about the fact that good controls change the conditions of work rather than the person doing the work. So it's that kind of whole concept of change the work, not the worker. So the controls that we see working best in small businesses include things like planning, ahead for workloads during those peak periods,
Mm.
maybe setting clearer expectations around those roles and what the priorities are, maybe like ensuring workers can really escalate issues easily, improving rosters, staffing levels of supervision. And one of the big ones is making sure that there's clear and you're enforcing customer aggression procedures and policies as well. So these kind of new regulations that are coming in are pretty clear that things like, mindfulness apps or resilience training won't cut it as the main control if the business could reasonably change how work is organized instead. So
Amazing.
it's okay to use them in combination with other things, but definitely not as a standalone.
Hey, Kelly, I know a lot of businesses are anxious about this and it can be confusing. The Chamber's got a significant number of SMEs, as does the entire mix of SMEs making up the economy. Roughly 95 to 97% of our members are SMEs. What does a small business need to do moving forward step by step? Because I think you've got a pretty basic way of explaining some base requirements, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And really, psychosocial risk management follows the same logic as physical risk management. So for smaller businesses, we will keep those steps simple. So firstly, identifying the hazards. So that simply means understanding where there is potential for that psychological harm. Where is the work creating that friction or pressure for your people?
Mm.
Then next, we'll need to assess the risk. So working out which of those issues is most likely to cause harm if nothing changes. Then we need to put our controls in place. So the focus is, of course, on fixing the work conditions that are causing the problem, fix the work, not the worker, and then recording what you've done. So it doesn't need to be complicated, just something that shows your thinking and your actions. And the final step really is checking and adjusting. So coming back to it after a while and asking whether things have actually improved, and if not, trying a different control. And the other thing to keep in mind also is there's a really big emphasis on genuine consultation throughout that entire process as well. So we can't really manage psychosocial risks without talking to the people who are experiencing them, right? And WorkSafe will obviously expect to see that workers were involved in that kind of hazard identification, in the selection of those controls, and of course, review whether they worked or not.
So I think what I'm taking out of that, Kelly, is to break that down in simplistic terms, you've got to make sure you can identify what the hazards are,
Mhm,
have those controls that are being put in place, and then
mhm.
have some process around checking that they're working. And there's a few different ways to do it. Is this
Absolutely.
going to mean there will be more paperwork or more admin for small businesses, do you think?
Not really, no. Short answer, no. So WorkSafe is definitely not asking small businesses for corporate size systems, right? They're
Mhm.
just kind of really wanting evidence that the businesses kind of looked for those psychosocial risks, like you say, taken some reasonable action and checking whether it's worked. And the evidence that you collect doesn't have to be hugely complex or onerous or anything like that. We're talking, meeting notes, an email to the team to confirm that you've taken an action or made a change. Or an action list or an action plan in Excel. So one thing we see a lot at Mapien is that small businesses are already doing a lot of this risk management stuff instinctively, right?
Mhm.
They just haven't been capturing it. So once we help them make the invisible work visible, that's really a huge step towards compliance with these new regs.
That's good. And I imagine that's going to help for transition of leaders and talent in and out of the business too, is you've got potential risk of having that IP sitting with the person and not necessarily documented, but if you can get through some really basic documentation and capture, then that's probably enough to satisfy the new changes and obviously builds a little bit of risk into there. So, Kelly, when a lot of people will be watching this particular webinar, 1 December onwards, 2025, is when these changes come into effect. So, what should small businesses be doing as of now, getting off this call, getting off watching this particular webinar in order to start complying with what they will be needing to do as a small business owner?
Yeah. So really our recommendation to all of our clients is to think about prevention in the first instance.
Mhm.
So we shouldn't be waiting for an injury or a complaint to occur. WorkSafe is certainly expecting businesses to prioritize prevention. But in all honesty, early action really is ultimately cheaper than dealing with a crisis later on down the track, right? So some of the things that an SME can get started with include things like starting conversations with workers about those stress points in the work. If you haven't already had those conversations, starting them, documenting them, maybe looking for some patterns that are specific to your business that may impact psychological health. So, those workload peaks. Is there any customer conflict? Are there any unclear roles? And then making sure that you're actioning those and those really clear and obvious improvements where you reasonably can too. And then, of course, writing down what was done and why too, part of that documentation piece.
And the big question, which unfortunately is often the stick, or you could call it the carrot for why businesses do take at least a little bit of action, is what's going to happen if businesses don't comply?
So from the 1st of December 2025, WorkSafe can issue things like improvement notices, perhaps even, going to the extent of prosecution. But often the bigger risk is business disruption. And so that would be via things like that we discussed before. So, turnover, absenteeism, conflict, burnout, drops in customer service, right? So compliance absolutely matters, but really good work design protects both performance and reputation as well. Very important for SMEs.
I think that's a really good point, Kelly, because we talk to businesses a lot about the compliance component.
Mm.
But when you look at what these changes are intended to achieve, they really are addressing some issues that should be helping productivity and efficiency
Absolutely.
and team culture and a whole lot of other benefits anyway. We see a lot of businesses that are addressing those are unlikely to have issues to do with changes in regulation, but ultimately a lot of this has to do with looking after your people, right?
Absolutely. 100%. That's at the core of it, isn't it?
Now, just quickly, can you perhaps just share a little bit about how Mapien helps businesses that might need some support in this space?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we do a lot of work in terms of helping our clients identify the psychosocial risks that exist in their environment. If they're not sure about how to start that whole consultation piece, we can help assist in that space. Also, that risk assessment side of things, a lot of people kind of, how do I go about that? That's definitely something we can assist with too. But where the rubber really hits the road is what kind of those controls that we talked about, what are going to be appropriate for your environment. Because what's a good control in one business might not necessarily be a good control in another business. So it's about kind of identifying what works for your business and your context as well, and kind of helping get those systems in place to make sure that we're monitoring that moving forward and making those sure those controls are working.
Mm.
We also do a lot of education around psychosocial hazards. I think that's one of the first steps is making sure you've got your head around, okay, what are they and what do I look out for? Because they're not always as clear cut as physical risks. Yeah,
Well, Kelly, speaking of education, I think a lot of our business community will find this really informative, and we're going to include some links for people to be able to reach out and get some further support and information. But a big thank you just for jumping on today. I think this is a really succinct way of just drawing people's attention to something that is a very, very important issue and some really important changes. So a big thank you for sharing that, and we'll make sure that we've got our business community connected with the right information moving forward. So thank you for joining us today.
beautiful. Thanks for having me.